Hi, this is the fellow passenger speaking. Today we're going to talk about the AFX Mode, the Aphex Twin machine that came as a firmware upgrade to Novation's Base Station 2, and how you could make your own version of that. I'm a little bit afraid of this episode, but before I say too much, here is a little glimpse of what's to come. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for watching this video, and I mentioned that I was a bit frightened of this episode, and the reason being a lot of people out there are really into Aphex Twin and have scrutinized his work far more than I have. So I would just like to start off saying that I do not know exactly how he works, but I'm inspired by his work. So I'm not pretending to do this exactly like how Aphex Twin did it. I'm just inspired by it, and I hope you have been inspired too. So, a little bit of backstory. A few years ago, Novation released the Base Station 2, which was an upgrade to their original base station, which I actually have. I do not have the Base Station 2, but I was following along when it came out, watching lots of stuff on YouTube, and eventually they released a firmware upgrade, which was done in collaboration with no less than Aphex Twin, and this firmware upgrade had something called AFX Mode, which basically allowed you to pretty much have a unique preset per key on the keyboard, which could result in some really interesting, sometimes chaotic outcomes. I was very fascinated by this. You could have unique tuning per key. You could just do some really unique things. And since then, I have been thinking about, can I make my own version of this? Is this possible to do in Ableton, maybe together with Max for Live? And I thought, okay, I've been thinking about this for far too long. I just need to start trying. And I have found a few different ways you can do this. There might be even more, but we're going to explore a few of them. One way of achieving this, which is really clumsy, I thought about it briefly, but I just want to mention it to you if this is a route that you may want to pursue. Let's say we want to turn, you can use any software synth for this, but just for illustration purposes, let's just take the wavetable synth. So what have I done? I've muted it. Let's just reset this. I apologize for this. Okay, so it's the standard preset of the wavetable synth. Now, how could we map all these different parameters and have different values depending on which key you're pressing? One way, a clumsy way of doing it, is to group that wavetable synth, and you make essentially as many copies as you are spreading across as many octaves as you need. So let's say you want to have the entire MIDI spectrum, which would make it 128 instances of the wavetable synth. You can already hear that that may be not the best way of doing things, but let's just do a few here just to illustrate this. So if I go in, how many did I make? Let's just make one octave. I think that's going to be the easiest. So I'm going to grab another one, and then we're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so that should give us a good spread. And then we are going to spread these different instances across the keyboard. And let's see. It's going to be a little bit tedious for a moment, so I might speed this up in the video, and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, I am back. I have literally, just to illustrate this, I have created 12 instances of the wavetable synth. I've just randomly now just set them up all differently, and they are mapped across just one octave here. So as you can hear, there is, all of them are unique in one way or another. That is one way you can do it, but do you want to have a huge amount of instances of the wavetable? Maybe not. So I thought about this a little bit further. Let's ditch that because we're not going to need it. And then I came up with this idea that if I could do this with just one instance of this, and if I could change parameters per value. So I built a device that I hadn't really found anywhere. You may know about the macro knobs, where you group something and you can map a lot of things to the same knob. So we can map, just picking all sorts of random things here. And then if I turn this knob, you can see the filter and the fold, and everything is changing. But I wanted something like that in reverse. So rather than having one knob controlling lots of things, I needed a lot of things controlling one parameter, because in sense, I needed something where I press a key on the keyboard and I want to change the value depending on which key I'm pressing. So I developed something called TFP. This one, many to one mapper. Basically what that does is allowing lots of different things modulating the same parameter. This is it turned out to be a really useful device in many instances, but just to illustrate what this does, I'm just going to talk you through, because it's a very simple plugin. You choose to map it to a parameter. I'm just going to pick the filter here, for example. It's got a master value, and that's basically the value is controlling that parameter in this instance. But then you got all these, how many do I have? I'm not going to count them, they're too many. I think they're about 18 or something. You can set up lots of alternative values. And now when I hit these buttons, it will change the master value and subsequently change the actual parameter to whatever value I've set it to. So therefore, this means that I could map my keyboard to this, for example, or for generative purposes. I'm not going to talk much about that in this particular episode, but this has become a super useful tool when making generative music, because you can have conditions happening in other channels. Let's say you reach the end of a sequence, or you have some random factor that may press one of these, which means that you can change what's happening in another channel. So this is an interesting tool for funneling signals through your system. But today we're going to talk about it in the context of this Aphex machine mode, and that's why I built it. There is another thing here. You can set auto update on, which means that if you want to modulate these values rather than setting one and just triggering it, you can. So you can see I move that one, that changes the frequency. This one changes the frequency as well. That one changes the frequency as well. That's if you have auto update on. That means that you don't require to hit this little trigger button next to it to jump to that value. I just want to give you a word of warning that if you have this on, don't set loads of things manipulating all of these at the same time, because it's quite likely that you will turn your existence into dark matter. It will be a black hole. It's going to suck you in, and the universe will never be what it was before you did that. So just be careful. Another couple of things that I've put in here are the user tags, which I have become a great fan of, because when you do mapping often, it doesn't really give you much of an indication what you've mapped stuff to, or where the mapping is coming from. So if you're mapping a lot of things to these different trigger values, especially if you use this device to funnel things through your entire system, it can be difficult to, like, if you leave the project for a couple of days and you open it up again, you just can't remember which one is which and what was mapped to what. And also you can obviously use several instances of this to control different types of things. So just as a recommendation, here you can say the general purpose of this instance, and here you can write in where these, the actual source of these different triggers. Because you might know that you can't, I didn't say this because I maybe took it for granted, is that if I map something like an LFO or whatever it might be to a value, that is the only thing that can be mapped to it. You can't map several things to one thing unless you use a device like this one, where it's only this device that can control the frequency in this case. But there's lots of things in here that you can, anyway, I think you get the point. All right, so I thought this is a brilliant idea, and you can have loads of instances of this for every parameter that you want to use in your Aphex mode. So there could be one for the filter, one for the tuning, one for the, in this case, the waveform shape, scrubbing through the wavetable, etc. I think you get the idea, but I bumped into another problem quite soon. So let me just demonstrate. I am hitting MIDI here, and let's say I've set up these values and I want to map a few MIDI keys there. So we do, let's just do a few here. And I'm going to illustrate why that is an issue. Okay, I think that's enough to illustrate. So I'm playing my synth, but when I get to those values, you can see these triggers being fired off here, and you can see the frequency changing, but no musical note comes through. And that's because how MIDI in Ableton works. I don't know if it's for any DAW, but in Ableton anyway, that as soon as you use it to control something, it stops the tracking data to come through. So it's actually not sending through any MIDI notes. So I can play all the other keys that are not mapped here. So I decided, like, okay, what's a good solution for this? And I came up with a solution which was not good, but it is a solution. It looks clunky, but I think this has also become another interesting tool, not only in this context, but also for other applications. But it is rather ugly, I have to warn you. So let me see if I can. Oh, I can't even type the fellow passenger. TFO. Gosh, what am I doing? And we got, that is a MIDI effect, and it is called MIDI Keymapper. Takes a moment to load. This is an enormous plugin. So basically what this is doing, I have made this little mapping device that, let me just show you. You can hear I can play the synth again. But you can also see, well, I'm playing around in this octave, so here's where they're going to light up. So you can see the keys I'm playing, they are lighting up, which allows me now to send triggers to anything without actually stopping the notes from playing. This is also an interesting way of sending signals around your system. And if you've got a keyboard, it's not sending out the velocity of the key. That's important to know. It's literally just a trigger. So that could be good for turning things on and off, or in conjunction with the Max for Live device that I just showed you, where you have lots of triggers to change the parameters. So basically we can combine this with the one we just had, which was the many to one mapper. So if we do, I'm just going to, just to demonstrate this a bit, we can map this to, let's map it to the wavetable. Just going to pull that filter up a bit because it's going to be a bit more audible. And then I'm just going to pick a few random values here. And if I now, let's just see which keys we got here. Okay, so we got the C3 and we map that to the first one. And we got the C sharp, D, D sharp, I don't have to do all of them. I think you can get the idea. So now, so you can see now it allows me to do exactly that. And I have also added in these little tabs here where you can type in a little note. So you just remember what things are mapped to. When you're mapping something, you get a little circle above. So if you want to unmap it, you can just click that. Or if you want to map it to something else, you can obviously just click the map again and do that. Okay, great, I thought. And then I just realized what monster I have made. So let's say this is the one that controls the filter. This one controls the wavetable. Let's say I'm just doing this to illustrate the next step of the problem. And this one controls the, I don't know, the fold setting. I mean, it could be anything really. And the more parameters you want to go AFX mode on, the more of these are you going to need. So now when I press the C3 key, I may want to change the filter and the wavetable and the fold all with the same key. And then we bump into this issue. So if I want to map this one, I can only map this to one thing. So how do we solve that then? Next step of the problem. So I've got another device, which I think I have shared with you before, but if I haven't, then here we go. Let me see, what's it called? That is one to many trigger mapper. Is that the one I want? Yes. So let's say we got our C3 key here. So I then map it to the trigger of this one, and then I can map all of these to the first one there, the first one here, and the first one there. So you can see when I hit the C, and the other key doesn't do anything, the C key triggers this one, which then passes it on to these ones. You can see how they're reacting there. but you can quickly see how messy this is going to get. I don't know if you haven't seen this tool. Again, it's a really useful tool for sending signals around your system. And yeah, again, I got these user tags so you can write some notes in there. You can also add a little bit of chance here if you don't necessarily want every single trigger to pass through. It's at 100% by default, but you can set that to however likely you want it to be. So these are 3 really useful Max for Live devices. But if you want to use these to create Aphex Mode, yeah, it sort of works, but it's going to be a monster job. Not only going through, if you want to do this across a lot of octaves and to go in and have so many different instances of this, it's going to be mapping hell. It's going to be difficult to get an overview. Just the amount of work to go in and choose the right values for every single one. And yes, if your mind and brain is way more complex than mine, and you know what you're looking for, you can go in and be very precise and dial in the exact crazy scale or whatever it is that you're after. But this made me think again. There may be a quicker way of doing an Aphex Mode. And there is a way that is way, way, way faster than this. If you are willing to do some sacrifices. And this mode is going to be much more fun and creative, and you're going to get a result way, way quicker, but you are going to give up some control. And let me show what that is. This is just like, let's just scrap all these super useful MIDI devices. They are truly useful, but they are not going to give us an Aphex Mode really fast. I would almost argue that maybe it stops being an Aphex Mode, but it starts being lovely anyway. So we are going to revert to one of my favorite plugins and maybe combine them with some of mine. It is basically relying more on random events that you can dial in. We're going to use the expression control that comes with Max for Live. I'm actually going to promote my own one, which you can get if you subscribe to me on Patreon. Let me see where we have. The only difference between mine and the one that comes with, actually, let's do this version, which has got a bit more random already started. The only main difference between my version and the one that comes with Ableton, it's basically a modified version where I've added this label in where you can write in a little bit more detail, because I tend to use a lot of these and I get lost otherwise. So we want to create loads of different parameters, but also like we almost want it to feel like you can make a bit of a track by just pressing keys using one channel. So here we go. I'm going to fast forward and meander a bit while you can watch the time lapse. I think it would be probably pretty boring if you would just have to follow every step, because I will probably do and undo and do different things. So I'm just going to be quiet for a moment, or well, I might be talking about other stuff on top of the time lapse, but I will be back shortly. While this time lapse is running, I just want to take the opportunity to talk to you about a few things. A few months ago, I had to quit my job. I have taken a bit of a sabbatical over the summer, and now I need to sort my future out properly. And I really do not want to give this up, making music and exploring generative ideas, etc. I am nowhere near making a living out of this, but the more incentive and help I can get, I will try to do what I can to keep this as, you know, something that can keep going and hopefully grow. So your support would mean more than ever. So other than a like and subscribe, which would be very much appreciated, but also if you would consider checking out my Patreon, the standard tier, which has been there since I started it, will give you all the downloads from this video, including those new Max for Live devices, and also all the downloads from the previous videos that I've made. I've also made a few new tiers. One which is pretty much the same, pay a little bit more, support me a bit with a bit more, helping me out at the moment. But you will also get a shout out. I've also set up a premium tier where you will get a one-to-one for 1 hour with me per month. It will be a Zoom call and you will have the opportunity to ask me questions or talk about my process, or if you want to share your work and have questions about that, I will do what I can to give positive feedback and hopefully help you progress in your music making. There is also another way you can support my channel. That is if you go and check out my merch store. If you want to buy a tote bag or a t-shirt or something similar, there will be a link in the description. I would also like to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Max MSP in general, because I have had friends and followers asking me the question, how do you get started with Max MSP? Is it just me, or is it damn difficult? And I would say the answer is, I think it is quite difficult, but I also now see where I used to go wrong. Because over the years, I have tried to do things in Max MSP, given it a genuine go, start watching tutorials and trying to solve things. But then it gets to a point where I just don't get over that threshold where I'm able to start making things. And then it sort of fizzles out. And then a year or 2 or 3 later, I give it another go. It's not until fairly recently where I have started to build things that I can just start from scratch and make something that I would find genuinely useful. And just to share with you where I think I went wrong in my process. 1, it did not work for me to just learning Max MSP for the sake of it. There are loads of tutorials out there, like how to build an FM synth or whatever it might be, and you sit there and just build something in abstract. Or sometimes it's just going through the foundation or the fundamental stuff about Max MSP without any particular goal in mind. That's when it fizzles out for me. And I had that advice quite a lot and say like, okay, choose something that you want to do. And then you got something to aim for and you can learn the necessary bits to build the thing that you want. And that's something I tried to invent. And I would easily think of things like some complex synthesizer or complex drum machine. And again, not thinking that, oh gosh, this is something that is quite complicated to build, and starting from absolute zero, that was hard. The thing that helped me get over that threshold were when I started to, I came up with something that was very, very basic. I can't remember now which one was the first one that I did, but I wanted to just convert a MIDI note to a trigger. So if I sent a MIDI note, I could turn something on and off. Like a very small component. But that felt, now in hindsight, that felt like that was probably the level that I needed to start. It was something that I needed, but it wasn't an enormous amount of work to get it working. The other thing that has helped me a lot, don't worry about, in quotation marks, stealing. I don't mean that you just take someone else's device and call it your own, but just to be able to make things that you can use. Find a device that might have parts of what you need. Let's say a map button that you want to be able to do something that can control another parameter. I spent a long time first trying to build my own map button, and yeah, it takes time and I couldn't get the satisfying results. So in the end, I grabbed a map button from an existing device and then I built the other bits that I wanted to use to control whatever it was that I was mapping in it to. And I think once I got over that hump and not feeling ashamed by cobbling things together from other people's work and then gradually starting to include my own components, etc., I still feel like I'm a very much a beginner in terms of Max MSP and Max for Live, but I'm certainly at a stage now where I can start building things that I find useful and I get a lot more joy out of it. I got a long journey still, but I am on a road now which I will probably stay on, and it will be simmering away and I will be moving forward rather than having the complete stop that I've had in the past. So I hope if you are in that position, that was a little bit of a useful encouragement. Think about little utility modules that you might need in your system. All right, let's see where we got to. Hey guys, we are back. I have been faffing around loads. So this is my take on the Aphex Mode. Let's just hear some examples. Okay, so as you can hear, lots of stuff is happening when I'm pressing a key, and I just want to talk a little bit about what I've done. I've got loads of these expressions controls. I started writing up where I was mapping them to, but then I sort of didn't towards the end. And just to prove an example of when it gets messy is like this, because now I can't remember what gate was that. It was probably one of the arpeggiators that I used, but I can't remember which one, so I could have written that in, but I didn't. I've introduced this one. I think this is something I posted years ago, but I just want to mention it. It's a little thing that just basically turns a key press on a keyboard into a trigger. So I'm then pressing this thing, which I built a version of this in a previous video, which I can share in the description. It's a version of that. It's not exactly the one that I built, but it's basically it's using the Random Map 7 device that I talked about earlier, I think. It's like the expression control, but it's taking a trigger rather than a key press on the keyboard. So basically I am using this one-to-many trigger mapper that we talked about earlier. So when I'm pressing a key, this is being pressed. This is then in return passing on those triggers to this one, which randomizes all these things, the flang rate and the chorus and everything on this pad sound. So every time I press a key, it's going to generate a new preset. I have set up a bunch of these expression controls here in the beginning, which basically can turn an arpeggio on and off, and the arpeggio itself is being randomized. I've got a bunch of sound sources in here, which we can see here. Let's move forward. I got a wavetable synth. I got an operator synth. I have got a sampler, which has got lots of percussive elements in there with an arpeggio before it. Another one which is doing the same thing with percussive sounds and an arpeggiator, but another sound set. I got two of my preset makers, the one that we just talked about, and then another one which is basically not using the trigger. Every time I press a key, it's just generating a new preset, which means that if you have the arpeggio running by random and you're holding a key, every note in the arpeggio is going to change that sound where it wouldn't with the other. And then I have mapped these across the chain selector, and when I press a key, the expression controls random is then just choosing which of these different synths are going to be triggered. And I'm using a minor pentatonic scale beforehand, just to make sure that whatever I press, it's always going to be in key. This is not about this exact process of doing it exactly like with this combination of synths and exactly these values being randomized. It's more for you to hopefully be inspired to go and make your own version of this. So basically we've got one channel here, but we can almost make a whole track by just holding down some keys on the keyboard. So you made your own little track maker. And if you want to sponsor me on Patreon, you will be able to get this project file. You will be able to get these super useful Max for Live devices that I've shared with you today, and you can use them in your own production. You will be able to use the sounds in this, and you can do whatever you want with it. I hope you found this inspiring. And I also just want to reiterate, I've set up a merch shop, and I have to say, more than ever, I could really do with your sponsorship, either if you want to sign up on Patreon or if you want to buy something from my shop. There will be links in the description. I've also set up a few new tiers on Patreon. If you would be interested in chatting to me about your own process or about my work, or if you have questions, I've set that up as an existing a new tier. It's a little bit more premium because you will get a one-to-one once a month for an hour. It will be interesting to see if anyone is interested in that. I have often felt that way when I have been watching YouTube tutorials. It becomes much more just one way, and you don't have a chance to ask questions or share your own work that easily. And, if you just want to talk about things, I just want to say that I don't think I would call myself an expert. It's probably more that I just like to talk about sharing the way I work and how I make things and what gets me inspired. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you would like to check back next week. I'm working on some more Max for Live devices, so if you're hanging in there at some point next month, it might even be next week, but I don't dare make that promise. I am working on some percussion sequencer to replace the really useful version of grids that I found for Max for Live, but is sadly no longer working since I upgraded my Ableton to be running on the native Apple Silicon chip, and that stopped the grids plugin working. I've been in touch with the developer, and he's unfortunately not able to compile the code and test it on a Mac M1. So I have set on the path of not building grids, but something that does a similar job, where I can quickly generate new percussive ideas. So if you hang in there at some point during next month, that sequencer will be coming your way if you are a Patreon subscriber. All right, it's time to go and grab some lunch. Thank you. Goodbye.